What was previously a wide open and barren field has rapidly transformed into the blueprints for a very successful zoo. If we're able to keep with this efficient pace, we should be able to open our doors in just a few short months. The backbone of any successful zoo isn't necessarily the animals that call it home, it's the staff who work there. Very fortunate for Keystone Park, we have one of the best and most professional rookie staffs around. When our zoo's doors open in just a few short months, they'll be ready. There is one glaring elephant in the room, however. With having hired a full staff before the zoo officially opened its doors, we're running dangerously low on capital. This means we had to cut expenses in some other areas of the zoo, and luckily for us, we found a very creative solution. So far, we've simply been rescuing animals native to the region. Thankfully for us, all three of our habitats have recently passed a hard inspection. The first of these habitats to pass was our waterfowl pond. It's the first exhibit you'll see at Keystone Park, and also the smallest of the three so far. 4 native bird species call this pond home. Following up on the waterfowl pond, you'll then be met with our timber wolf enclosure. So far, it's by far the largest habitat here at Keystone Park. Only 2 rescue timber wolves call this place home, and they've adjusted to their habitat incredibly well. Once the zoo opens its door to the public, we aim to put these 2 in a breeding program. This is Kirby. He's incredibly friendly, yet also likes his alone time. He truly embodies the phrase lone wolf. Phoebe is a fair bit smaller than Kirby. Her fur is also a fair bit lighter, making them very easily distinguished. While usually the more hyper of the 2, she seems incredibly sleepy right now. Matter of fact, Kirby's tired as well. We should probably let these 2 rest and catch up with our other animals. In the last episode, we transformed an abandoned cabin on our land into a beautiful red fox enclosure. It comfortably houses the 3 red fox rescues, all of which have been given names. Let's go through them. Meet Todd and Vixie. Todd is one of our 2 males in the enclosure, and Vixie is actually our only female. These 2 are absolutely inseparable, and it's very rare to see one without the other. Our youngest fox is named Kit. Being the youngest, he's incredibly hyper and always on the move. It's very rare to see him actually standing still or sleeping. Though their exhibit is relatively small, it made great use of the land we were provided, and is an invaluable resource for the Keystone Park community. Being able to take something that was on our land and not destroy it but modify it was truly inspiring. The zoo is running like absolute clockwork so far. However, there is one problem that may begin to rear its ugly head. Our 2 main enclosures so far, being the timber wolves and the red fox, both eat meat. I think we need to locate a strictly herbivorous animal and add it to our roster. There's only one animal that could possibly fit the role of being Keystone Park's first herbivore. To answer this question, we have to first define what a keystone species is. In case you've forgotten, a keystone species can be defined as an animal or organism that holds an ecosystem together. I think this definition can naturally be extended to animals that create ecosystems, and if you're excited to see this build, don't forget to like and subscribe. In my opinion, this is the best and most professional build I've ever done, and you're really not going to want to miss this video. When I said create ecosystems, I really wasn't kidding. Meet the architect of the wetlands, the North American beaver. These herbivorous creatures are not only going to become our first herbivores in the zoo, but also our first rodents. Having a population in the wild of around 10 to 15 million, you'd expect them to have quite the range, but even this is quite impressive. We'll delve into their expert survival tactics later in the video, but for now, let's focus on their minimum habitat requirements. This is the first animal in the zoo with a water requirement, and a large one at that, but they also have a deep dive requirement too. This naturally makes the exhibit rather complicated, but we'll talk about why much later in the video. Fortunately for us, the exhibit itself is going to be the only complicated thing for the beaver. Their reproduction cycle and social needs are all incredibly basic. As long as we just have 2 beavers, everything is going to be accounted for. As you can see by their dietary options in the top left, these guys are strictly herbivorous. They also have some enrichment items that we haven't gotten the chance to use yet since we've only built for carnivores. They should make a perfect addition to the zoo. Lastly, they actually do have interspecies enrichment, however we're not going to be adding the skunk or the raccoon to the zoo quite yet. In the future though, be on the lookout. We've made quite a dent in North America with our fox and wolf enclosure over here. We're going to be branching off near the waterfowl pond and making a section dedicated to the wetlands. The design for this exhibit is going to be incredibly dynamic. It has to match the deep dive requirements that the North American beaver needs. If you're unfamiliar with the deep dive mechanic, I'll try to explain it in as simple terms as I can. In summary, there's a select group of animals that are able to dive below the water's surface. Typically, the smaller the animal, the less requirement for deep dive there are. According to the official Planet Zoo chart, the North American beaver needs 2 meters of water to be able to deep dive. This is exactly why this random pole is in the middle of where the pool is going to be. It's exactly 2 meters tall. I'm going to be effectively using it like a ruler to make sure the water level is always where we need it to be for the beavers to be able to dive. It took an absolute ton of trial and error, but I finally found a design I was happy with. I really like the curves in the glass. They make the build look so much more interesting to me. I'm loosely basing this beaver enclosure off of the Columbus Zoo's future North American river otter enclosure. I thought it would be a really fun challenge to build a habitat based off one that doesn't exist in the real world yet. The main gimmick of this build, besides the deep dive pool, is going to be the multi-layer viewing sections. As you can hopefully see on the top, this exhibit actually goes up a fair amount. Let's work from the bottom up today. I think this will be easiest. The path isn't necessarily close to the tank, but I want to use these plaster pieces to give the illusion that it goes right up to it. We have to use the camera to be precise. The more the plaster comes through the glass, the less space the beavers are going to have to deep dive. To make this look good and really sell the illusion of the path, this is a very tedious process. Luckily, if something's tedious, it usually means the end product is well worth the grind. That actually took such a long time, but I'm incredibly happy with the final product. It looks so good. We're not quite done with the plaster yet. We have to find a way to make the interior of the pool look good. But from the outside, from this angle, it looks really nice, and we were able to keep the water level for deep dive requirements. We just received an urgent report from a local farmer. Apparently, a number of North American beavers have been trespassing on his land and eating his crops. Only one is available in the video he sent us, and the footage is relatively grainy, so it's tough to see how many we're dealing with. If you'll recall what the Zoopedia says, we need at least 2 beavers for them to function. They're relatively social rodents after all. Since we don't necessarily know how many we're adopting, let's plan for 2, however make the exhibit large enough to house a family of 6 or 7. I was really dreading this part of building the pool, but it surprisingly wasn't that bad. We used the grid pieces, but in separate groups to make sure we could put them wherever we wanted, and then just filled in the gaps with these large circular plaster pieces. Eventually, we were left with this really sleek design. Thankfully, we didn't have to compromise said design for function, because the pool is still 2 meters deep, allowing the beavers to be able to deep dive. It's incredibly easy to over-design an exhibit in Planet Zoo. We have so many pieces at our disposal. I really like the simple look of this glass. It's one of the only in-game barriers that I'll keep and not really change much of anything. That being said, we are going to be adding these conservation gutter pipes to the outside of the glass to make it a little bit less rigid. While we're here, I want to do a little bit more of generic shaping for the exhibit, and we're going to be using these faux rocks. These come from the aquatic pack, and are in my opinion, one of the best building blocks in the game. We're going to be using these mainly as a transitional period between the actual landscape and the exhibit itself. Since we're going for a relatively simple look for this beaver enclosure, we don't want to overdo it with these rocks despite the temptation. They look really good. These smaller variants especially make for some pretty impressive details. We had to use some much taller rocks on the other side of the enclosure, since this faces a cliff. If there's one pack of DLC you should definitely purchase, it's the aquatic pack, mainly because of these faux rocks. The animals are incredible too, but I couldn't imagine building an exhibit like this without these. Despite me wanting to, we sadly can't only use faux rocks. In the time between episodes, 2 DLC packs for console have come out, the Conservation and the Arctic. We're going to be using some Conservation Pack plants in the build today, including this Yorkshire foggrass. To add some cohesion to the rest of North America, as well as keep the kids away from the grass, I brought over this fence design we've used in the past couple episodes. With the bottom of the exhibit done for now and the shaping 100% complete, let's move on to the top. Since while in the water, the beavers are going to be incredibly exposed in this enclosure, I don't want the guest to be able to view them from every possible angle. However, now we're going to be working on the one section where the guest will always be able to see them. We're going to be building a small education center modeled after a log cabin that sits atop this hill. From here, the guest should be able to have a good view of the entire exhibit except the pool, which you'd have to go down to see. I wanted to incorporate some of the new items released to console, especially from the Conservation Pack. I've heard it's incredible. That's not to say the Arctic Pack is any slouch. I actually decided to use the Arctic roof for this build. After getting the roof exactly how I wanted it, I then started on the walls. I began with some glass panes. Now that we have the basic size of the education center picked out, I then decided to line it up with the path. I decided to completely finish the wall that we've already started first, and I don't necessarily want the entire wall to be made of glass, I just want it to be a small window, so we're going to be using some of the dyeable wood and cover up a majority of the glass. To get the top part of the glass covered up, I decided to simply copy and paste over the bottom layer to the top. Now we have this perfectly small window, exactly the size I wanted it. When building something relatively significant for an exhibit, I always like to check it out from a variety of different angles to make sure it looks good, and so far I'm pretty happy with the location. It's amazing how in just 13 seconds of gameplay, you can almost double the work you've done just by using copy and paste. I can't put into words how important the advanced movement menu is to becoming good at this game. Mastering every aspect of it is genuinely such a good investment of your time. The last thing I did for now with the viewing gallery was just work on the sides a little bit, using the exact same wood. Now that we have a functional viewing gallery and a deep dive pool, The last thing this exhibit needs to be fully functional is a gate for the beavers to actually enter through. Normally I'm very against using the in-game barriers, and I'll null barrier everything, but for this exhibit we're going to be using the chain link fence. The reason I decided to use the simple chain link fence instead of a more complicated one is because I don't want the guest's eyes to be drawn to the fence. The focus is on the pool and the viewing gallery. There is, however, one more aspect of this exhibit that we haven't built yet that I want the guest's attention to be drawn to, and it's going to be right here. Earlier in the episode, I called the North American beaver the architect of the wetland, and I wasn't kidding when I said that. They actually do create these biomes. They do this by building their famous dams, and we're going to recreate one here. By building their famous dams and lodges, beavers can transform a simple small stream into a massive pond or even a lake. These wetlands, in turn, can provide habitats for many species including fish, other mammals, waterfowl, songbirds, amphibians, and insects. They create entire ecosystems, and they truly are engineers in the animal kingdom. The story I'm trying to tell of this beaver lodge is that this was once a small stream. The beavers built their lodge here, forcing this pond to be created. This is where their pool lies. I purposely made the build look a little bit incomplete, as the beavers are currently working on it. Behind this is going to act as a dried up stream. We're going to decorate it with rocks and pebbles on the bottom, but for now let's get some foliage in. When placing down a lot of foliage, the number one thing I always like to do first is get the terrain requirements fixed. This will act as my blueprint for where the foliage will actually go. What I mean by this specifically is I'm placing this buffalo grass, as well as some other varieties of grass, over where the terrain is laid with grass. If you do all of the pre-planning of how you want your exhibit to look when you're placing down the terrain in the paint menu, it makes placing the actual foliage a lot easier. Starting off with any species of grass is also recommended. It's so small and you're going to end up using so much of it, it's better to get this step out of the way first. After the grass was placed, I then decided to utilize a variety of bushes. I'm mainly placing them within the chain link fence that was already placed. This is to obstruct the guest's view. We want to funnel them into the beaver education cabin. A little ways into the foliage, I realized that we weren't really doing a good job of selling the story this habitat's trying to build. Remember, a part of this is supposed to be a dried up riverbed, so I decided to use some parched versions of the grass we'd been using where the water was previously located. This entire exhibit is primarily built upon a slant. It's not very intense, the beavers are going to be able to climb it with ease, but we had to use a lot of the align to surface feature in the advanced movement menu. It really came in handy. It's nowhere near done yet, but the vision is relatively clear to me now. Before we continue placing the foliage, I want to place the enrichment items. Some of them are a little bit big, and since it's on a slant, we can't necessarily use anything that applies to gravity, like a beach ball, for example. Apologies in advance for the screen flashing orange right about now. That's just what happens when you place these water jet rocks. They automatically take you to the heat map. Like the water jet rocks, a majority of the enrichment items in this enclosure are going to have to do with the water. This submarine buoy is actually a very good example of this, since it's almost entirely submerged in the beaver's pool. I hope they like this rubber duck. It'll be really cute to see them play with it. If I recall, in the footage that the farmer sent us showing us the beavers we're going to be rescuing, they were eating a watermelon. Let's give them a welcome gift. Since we don't have the space to actually build the beavers an effective lodge, we'll have to settle for this outdoor bedding. Who knows, maybe in the future we'll come back to this and actually build the beavers the lodge they deserve. To test the beavers' problem-solving capabilities, we're going to get rid of some of the buffalo grass over here and place a slow feeder. While I was over on this section of the exhibit, I decided to replace all of the buffalo grass with some Yorkshire fog grass. I went for the small variant since it's relatively new and I'm not quite sure how it's going to look when compared to the beavers, but I really like it. I used it to cover up some small imperfections that are now basically invisible. I also decided to finalize the slope in the pool. The connection of the two sections took a little bit of time, but I like the result. The pool in general is looking really good, although I want to see how it looks with some foliage on the bottom of it. I'm not sure the beavers are going to like the entirely sleek design. These underwater hydrilla plants take up a lot of space horizontally, but not very much vertically, so it shouldn't impede their 2-meter deep dive distance. We are pushing the limit towards the water level, so we have to be careful. Despite it not necessarily being native to the region, I placed a lot of these ivy patches on the roof of the education center, as well as the walls. This makes it blend in a lot more seamlessly to the surroundings. Most of these trees are just temporary, and to be honest they're just there for the thumbnail, but you get the point. Lily pads will typically only grow in still waters, and since the beavers have blocked off the stream and created a pond instead of a flowing source, I figured they would make really good sense to go here. I also worked on covering up the fence with a variety of species of different plants. We used bracken, various bushes, some bristles, a lot of different things. I think it's finally safe to say this exhibit is 100% done, at least on the inside. We just have to pass our inspection, and I'm a little bit nervous. That means the exhibit is 100% ready for the beavers. I'll send a team out shortly to go gather them. There's 2 of them that we're going to be bringing here, a male and a female. Before the beavers arrive, I want to finalize the exterior of the exhibit as well as finish the inside of the education center. I started off by lining the east side of the path with some more faux rock, connecting it to the rock we already placed. Afterwards, I placed a bunch of mulch on the top, trying to make a sublayer. This makes a perfectly natural flower bed, where we can get some color in this exhibit. I placed a variety of flowers, as well as some bushes. I tried to keep the colors to a minimum. I only wanted to have this purple hint. It's simple, but gets the job done. Now let's work on the education center. I've been saving this for last because traditionally I am not very good at decorating interiors, especially ones this small. I figured a good place to start for the education center was with some actual education items. For now we're just going to be using this education board. I also placed down some conservation boards. These are incredibly interesting, can actually teach you a lot about the real world. I highly recommend giving each of these issues a read if you haven't done so already. I wanted to give the window an interesting angle, so I decided to take these planks from the Arctic pack and angle them at about 15 degrees. The shaping reminds me of an area that guests can actually lean on. I then blended the shape into the rest of the wall. I liked the coloring and the texture of these twilight panels a little bit more, so I decided to change everything to them on the interior, at least on the wall facing the window. After completing the wall, I then decided to borrow this education sign I found in the workshop that we used at our waterfowl pond. I really like using custom workshop items to detail interiors. I don't like to rely on the workshop heavily, but I use it to cover my weaknesses in building. I decided to make the cabin a fair bit larger while working on the sides for the doors. It's getting so big and bulky it just didn't look right at one story. I used the exact same wood from the Arctic pack to line the second story of the roof. It's a different piece, but the exact same texture, and it looks good still. This is probably my favorite detail of the entire build, if not the entire episode. I really like these Arctic roof trims. They really make the build stand out. Lastly, I added a fair bit of polish on the interior, using these thin planks of wood to break up the 2 textures. I also added some more logs. This makes the build look a little bit more informal, which is important to capture when building a simple log cabin. Finally, I borrowed the doors from the gift shop. We used the exact same frame and everything. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, although in the future I think I'm going to come back and decorate it with some ivy and maybe some more plant life on the inside. It's a bit brown for my liking, but overall it's a good start. Luckily, the zoo isn't actually open yet, so it doesn't matter that the education center isn't 100% complete. The bulk of the exhibit is, and the beavers are here. Let's introduce them to their new home. While our expert staff brings the beaver to their new enclosure, let's give it a quick overview. This is easily Keystone Park's most modern exhibit, and in my opinion, the best yet. It's also by far the most dynamic, with the most elevation changes and moving parts that go with it. Welcome to the zoo! We officially have our first herbivores, and I couldn't have chosen a better one. The size of the beaver mixed with the view from the education center is absolutely perfect. I couldn't have planned it any better in my opinion. I can't wait to see what it looks like from the deep dive pool though. It looks like our male beaver's about to arrive. Remember, if you have any name suggestions for our male or our female, we have one of each. Feel free to leave them in the comments below. Community engagement and feedback is a huge part of what makes this channel special. I really enjoy reading every single comment in the videos. It looks like our 2 beavers have worked up the courage to embark on their maiden voyage. I'm just really hoping there's no collision issues with the plaster I used. The views and angles you get from the bottom of the pool are absolutely stunning. I can't believe how good of a job we did. Our beavers don't seem to be in the mood to deep dive currently. I don't know if we made the exhibit wrong or they're just tired or maybe sleepy. Who knows? We'll check up on them in a few minutes. For now it seems like they're preoccupied exploring the rest of the land area of their habitat. It's a bit early to tell yet, but I really do think they enjoy it here. After a tasty snack of watermelon, the beavers did decide to use the deep dive pool. This was an absolutely massive weight off my shoulders, because if we did this wrong, even by an inch, we would have had to redesign the entire exhibit from the ground up, and this recording would have been worthless. Thankfully, with some hard work, perseverance, dedication, as well as a little bit of passion, we managed to make a perfect beaver enclosure, and I couldn't be happier with it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end. I think that's where we're going to call it for today's episode, but I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know what animals you want me to build for next in Keystone Park. Catch you in the next one. Kingpin out.